Peace, family. It's your brother, Marc Lamont Hill. Welcome to Night School. Every night here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel, we hold Night School, where we break down the most urgent topics, the most interesting conversations, the most controversial matters going on in the world today. And tonight is no exception. We have a great group of conversations, a great group of people to have those conversations with as we talk about and think about the entire global context of 2024, specifically in 2024 in a post-Biden universe, what is entering another Trump universe, Trump 2.0, in the midst of genocide, in the midst of invasions. How do we make sense of this moment? How do we move forward toward justice in this moment? A week ago, 9 days to be exact, this country, the United States of America, decided that it was going to re-elect Donald J. Trump as president. And for some people, that was a surprise. They could not imagine how that could happen. For other people, it was an inevitability. But either way, the outcome, from my perspective anyway, is that we are going to be moving in a direction that is deeply troublesome as a nation. We were already in that direction under Biden, but it seems that we're going to get even worse under Trump. But I want to make sense of what that means specifically for the Middle East. I want to make sense of what that means specifically for activism. I want to make sense of what that specifically means for Israel-Palestine, what that means for Lebanon. I want to make sense of how we, as a movement committed to ending genocide, abolishing prisons, liberating the captive, creating economic justice, ending environmental abuse, and so on. How do we do that against the backdrop of a Trump reascendance? I got a couple of people here to help me think through that. I got Greg Stoker here. I got, I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out these buttons. This is why I'm not allowed to, I'm gonna do this for now because I'm not usually allowed to play with the buttons here. But I have joined me, Greg Stoker. He's an Army veteran. He's an activist, and he is the host of the Colonial Outcasts podcast and State of Play. I'm also joined by Jenan Matari, who is a writer, a producer, and founder of Zaytoon Publicity. I want to thank you both for joining me. Before we start the conversation, I got a note to all you out there. I need every single night school classmate to share this video with a friend. I want you to share it with your group chat. I want you to share it with your social media community. Let's invite as many people as possible into tonight's global classroom. Also, a reminder, comments, y'all, don't act foolish in these comments. I need y'all to act right in the comments section. We're not always going to agree, but you can disagree or dissent without using hate speech. We got chat moderators watching. I didn't even know who our moderators were or how it works, but I've been told that we got them and they're going to do something. You will receive a warning in the comments. Second offense, you will be muted, meaning you're going to lose your ability to comment. And the third strike, you will be banned. Again, we want free speech. We want free-flowing dialogue, but we also want to create a climate and a context where people feel good about their conversations. Anyway, getting that housekeeping stuff out the way. Jenan, Greg, thank y'all for joining me on Night School. It's so good to see your faces. How are you feeling after last week's election?
Greg, you want to go first?
Well, you know, I was shocked at in 2016 when he won the first time. And I was kind of like mildly horrified, but that's because I didn't understand the systems at play and the forces that were essentially at work, which I think we're going to flesh out and talk about in this episode. And now, you know, I said that the Democrats were going to lose 5 months ago for the reasons I think they did. And that's not because I'm some like visionary. It's just paying attention in a way that, and looking at certain like systems like liberalism and, you know, how the Democratic Party ran its campaign being completely out of touch. That this time I'm just kind of like resigned. It's like, okay, we have work to do. Foreign policy, I don't really believe is going to change in any substantive way. Which we can debate for sure. But yeah, definitely not shocked.
Jenan?
I think I'm on the same page as Greg, minus the foreign policy thing. I think it's definitely going to get significantly worse for us. But Same thing in 2016. I was shocked, couldn't believe that something like that had happened, realized that it wasn't because it was because I wasn't paying attention. And I didn't understand the politics of this country. And I knew he was coming back. And it happened. It played out exactly the way that we said it would. The people who, are now being blamed for his reelection, that is all playing out the way we had, warned everybody that it would. And, just like Greg, I don't think anything's going to change in terms of our advocacy work. I think it's definitely going to be harder. There's going to be a lot of pressure, a lot of movements within the government spaces to try and criminalize our work a lot more. But nothing should change. It should fuel people more. We're just going to have to protect our rights here and work to end our involvement in genocide abroad.
So let's start with how we ended up here, because I share most of your sentiments. 2016 surprised me. I endorsed Jill Stein and I thought, and Najama Baraka, and I thought really deeply about what it meant to organize and fight, not just against a Donald Trump, who didn't seem like a real person at the time. It didn't seem like a legitimate campaign to me, but also against Hillary Clinton. And as we organized and we fought and we struggled, I assumed that Hillary would win anyway, and that we would be organized on the ground against Hillary Clinton to stop these things you're talking about, imperialism, genocides, etc. Trump took me by surprise in 2016. I think a lot of people felt like the wind was let out of them. This time around, like you all, I was a lot more sober in my analysis. I had no expectation that Kamala Harris would win. I thought it was possible. But when she was first, I said, there's no way Biden wins. And I said, I don't see Kamala winning. I think the thing that I've been struggling with, and I'd love to get your insights on, is the why of it. I'm going to stipulate that, being Black and a woman makes it a lot harder to become president, maybe even impossible at this juncture in history. But I'm not sure anybody running on her platform would have won this time around. What was it, Greg? I'll start with you, that made this campaign unsuccessful, particularly from the leftist perspective?
Well, from the leftist perspective, to deny that this country is filled with racist and patriarchal, misogynist structures would be an insane claim to make. However, one of the root causes, and that will definitely be part of it, is that, the Democratic Party's collapse is manifest and undeniable, and it really does validate a lot of left-wing critiques of its rightward drift, its identity politics, however valid, and a lack of an egalitarian and progressive economic agenda. And when we pointed this out, we were criticized, lampooned, and kind of like defamed by Democratic Party elites when we were warning about this. But this is the culmination, I think, of a decades-long failure of the Democratic Party to become like a bastion of the working class, in a working classes in a universal and pluralistic sense, not in like the coded white supremacist sense that MAGA world talks about the working class, but like everybody. And so it's a party failure, and there's not going to be self-reflection from the donor class and the elites and the policy crafters and the operatives within the DNC, because if they really wanted to change that way and become a truly progressive party, they would have to talk about capitalism and liberalism and how that functions and affects the working class. And the problem with like liberalism, and where we get the term liberal, libertas, freedom, liberty, in its idealistic form, you have personal freedoms, the right to self-determination, but it's also free market economics. And the problem with it is that, most political theorists and scientists would agree that it's a center-right, sometimes a right-wing ideology with a focus on capital accumulation and property And the problem with liberalism is it rests on a fundamental contradiction that cannot really be resolved. We're seeing this play out with the genocide in Palestine. It will always fail and always collapse because it tries to hold like two commitments, sometimes opposing commitments at once. You've got
what are those commitments in this case?
So a firm commitment to capital accumulation, the maximization of profits every year, and expressing support for like principles like human rights and democracy, freedom of speech, and the environment, the rule of law. And we're seeing the rule of law crumble, democracy. People lost faith in it, which I believe is one of the big reasons that there wasn't like a lot of voter turnout. They feel disenfranchised by the electoral system, which is an antique that is inherently racist and classist as well. And, that's the problem. Like the need for capital accumulation requires cheapening labor, resources, and nature, and it comes into direct conflict every time with principles like rights and equality. And whenever this conflict appears, which it's been appearing for decades now, and culminating in where we are right now, is that the liberal ruling class will always side with capital, and it abandons their like lofty principles, both like overseas and here, which we can call like the imperial boomerang if we want to get into that, and throws workers and nature, like the environment, under the bus every single time. And they will never look at the system. There'll never be any introspection around that. And from a leftist perspective, that's kind of why I think inherently the Democratic Party is incapable of resolving this crisis of identity. It will always go right. Yeah.
Well, we certainly saw that in the Kamala Harris candidacy. It seemed that even as populism was the order of the day, she kept defying the will, the interests, the desires of her base. Jenan, hearing her talk about fracking was like, okay, my head's spinning a little bit. But when people are saying, just give us a ceasefire, just, the lowest of low bars here, it seemed that she decided to move even further to the right. When I watched, I watched, and I said this contrary to what some people in the audience may say, during the election, I sort of said, why is Jill Stein being criticized for these endorsements from people she doesn't want them from? Obviously, David Duke is a terrible human being. He's a monster. But you can't control who endorses you. Jill Stein said, I renounce David Duke and the endorsement. She did all she could, but people said, no, but the fact that he endorsed her says something about her campaign. It means something. And it's like, okay, well, if that were true, and I don't accept that, but if that were true, then what the hell does it mean that one of the biggest war criminals of the 20th century, and that says a lot, Dick Cheney, is endorsing Kamala Harris? What does it mean that all these right-wingers, people who we saw as the kind of the poster children of all the excesses of right-wing governance, all the problems with all the fascist leadership, all the language we use to decry the Bush administration and the Cheney Cheney rulership of the country behind the scenes, all that stuff, they're saying Kamala's good enough for us. That has to mean something then by the same logic. Mm-hmm. She was clearly moving to the right, despite the fact that it seemed like even the votes, to Greg's point, even the evidence that said, hey, you got a better chance of winning if you move to the left, if you fight the corporations, etc. They still move to the right, despite the fact that the evidence said maybe go to the left. Why would somebody do that? I get the abstract idea that Greg is saying, which is, these contradictions have to be resolved that way. But in practice, what does that mean for somebody like Kamala Harris? Why would she look at the data and say, you know what? I'm still going to support the genocide indirectly. I'm still going to do this. Why would she do that?
I don't know. I mean, this could sound like a bit of a conspiracy theory, but I do think that at some point the Democrats had accepted that they lost their voting base, and there was no way to get them back. I mean, the last 4 years under the Biden administration has been horrible for the average working American. Life is unlivable. We were stripped of rights. They did nothing to protect it. It was very clear they had no intentions of doing anything to protect those rights. They're in, they're still in office now for another 1+ month, and they're not doing anything. Like, they're still using this. The media is still fixating on like how dangerous Trump is going to be for the American public. And there are no actions being taken by the Democrats who are in power right now to protect the rights that they say are under threat. And it seems like, and this is the conspiracy theory part, it almost seems like it was a ploy to help get Trump elected in order to get something like Project 2025 like in action, and to bring the United States back to this like like soft colonial era where people think that like under Republican rule it's all about family, it's all about the working class, it's all about patriotism. And Trump is a very like explosive figure. He's someone that the average American, I think, relates to very well, unfortunately. And I think in order for the Republican Party to kind of get back to that like old school Republican rule, they needed someone like Trump to be at the forefront, to kind of, get back into office and make those moves. Yeah.
Jenan, I don't know. I probably don't buy the conspiracy theory part, not because I think they're above it or anything like that.
Yeah.
I just think both parties are so right wing. You almost don't have to do that to get a right wing agenda.
Yeah. Yeah. It almost doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who's in office. And I think that was part of the, all of us who had endorsed the third party candidate we all kind of understood that regardless of what is your most important issue as an American, or if you care about issues abroad, it doesn't matter who is in the office in American government because they're the same. And so this idea of like getting enough votes for a third party to make a difference in the next election is something that we all focused on because it would have proved that like we wanted change. The American people wanted a new party. We wanted to break this two-party system. But for some reason, the minute they took Biden off and put a woman of color up there, identity politics played a huge role in distracting people. Identity politics is something that I bought into once, back in the day, and I understand how dangerous it is now. And I think it was really weird to kind of watch the shift in very vocal voices who specifically were standing up for Palestine and using their platforms to speak for Palestine, very obviously switch to like full support for Democrats and going to, the DNC, and they would go to the parties and videotape the parties of like hotties for Harris. And it was just very bizarre. It was really weird. It was weird that nobody could make the connection that like they took the perfect opportunity to like distract people when a movement that was connected to so many other issues abroad and domestically, and that they were just trying to distract people, and it worked really well. And it's caused a lot of internal pain and friction.
I would add to that, not disagree even, but add to that. I think there are people who weren't distracted, but struggled openly with the consequences of each choice. I am one of those people. For example, who I don't believe that Trump and Kamala Harris are the same in terms of what the consequences are of their presidencies. I think the parties ideologically are much more similar than anyone would ever want to admit on either side. I think they're both corporate parties. I think they're both right-wing parties. But I think that there are, particularly domestically, I think that there are some concrete differences. And I do think that there's some value to saying, hey, I want to be able to pick my opponent, not because one is inclined to agree with me or inclined to yield, but simply the terrain on which we struggle is different and maybe more amenable to our interests. For example, to give you a concrete example, if Donald Trump elects 3 more Supreme Court justices, or selects 3 more Supreme Court justices, if the constitution of the court shifts to the right any further, it could take a generation or 2 to change, which allows things like the Chevron decision or Roe v. Wade or affirmative action, all these things to be radically changed, which again shrinks the terrain, the space of the terrain on which we fight. You know, for Black people in this country, for queer people in this country, for poor people in this country, no justice is going to come from either party, but there might be an easier struggle, particularly for the most vulnerable among us. I believe fewer people would have died during the pandemic if anybody but Donald Trump were a leader, Democrat or Republican. Yeah. Some of it is just the unique ineptitude and evil of a Trump administration, which I don't want to turn Trump into the boogeyman because I think that's the problem, but I do think there's a unique situation here that it's not unprincipled or uncritical to be thoughtful about. What would you make of that contention, Greg, and then you, Jenan?
Well, first, I personally don't think it's necessarily like a conspiracy, and I'm saying that you actually do think that. I think it's interests aligning at the corporate level, politicians being lobbied by those interests, and the Democrats and Republicans, to what Mark was saying, kind of like serve as a convenient boogeyman that activates the donor base, gets the people going. And the thing about the Democrats that we have to understand, and of course there's a lot of validity to saying like, hey, pick who you want to fight against. It's always going to be easier, you know, to assemble and organize under Democrats, we think. And based off of the Trump presidency and like BLM, that's demonstrably true. But the Democrats, if you want to like fundamentally understand them, at least from my dirty leftist perspective, like at most what they will try to do is negotiate like mediocre compromises, like a few social policies here and there, some abortion rights, but we'll never enshrine them because that's where our fundraising comes from, and a tiny increase in minimum wage every like decade, but nothing that might pose any serious threat to, you know, capital accumulation. I'm sorry to talk in like vague terms, but this is why we see the soul crushing almost slowness to liberal incrementalism. You know, we change things slowly, we do it responsibly. That's just how big government works. And ultimately, though, they are really like unwilling to take any of the obvious steps that would actually resolve our urgent like social and ecological crises. And this is kind of like why no one trusts them. You know, they don't have the same, like, there's a lot of people in the Harris campaign formed like a parasocial relationship with her. That's my belief. But it's less, it doesn't seem as culty to Trump, but like the center can't hold. The thing is, like, I believe, and I think we're seeing this play out, that liberalism will always collapse and inevitably hand power over to fascists. And there's really only one way to overcome this, and that's to mobilize a socialist alternative. But the government's never going to do that. So if we're going to talk about activism eventually, I would love to comment on that. But like, yes, it's going to be more difficult. Everything's going to be more difficult under Trump. You know, a lot of people on the left will say, you know, Democrats are the same wing of, you know, a different wing of the same fascist bird. But yeah, but one's demonstrably worse on pretty much everything. And, you know, except for the 1% of the time where they have an accidentally based take where they're like, what's going on with the war in Ukraine? But like, it's for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, no one's arguing that. Like, it sucks that Trump's president. A lot of people are going to suffer, but now it's kind of like, what are we going to do about it?
But and I think that's the challenge. If you're among the people most likely to suffer, mm-hmm. I think it's a bit challenging to tell those people, hey, it will get demonstrably worse under Trump. They both suck, but Trump's worse. Mm-hmm. But let's get to the worst so that we can eventually get to a radical alternative. That I don't disagree with that at the conceptual level. But if I'm one of the people, you know, whose life or safety is a ransom for that transformation, it's hard to say, yeah, some of your children are going to die from this, or some of your, some of your country is going to be colonized, or some, it's hard to say that to people. I'm seeing a comment coming. Rosability said, Mark, please stop giving Joe Biden an ounce of credit for saving people from COVID. They didn't. They just smiled. They kept telling us this. Let me be clear, Rosability. I'm not giving Joe Biden credit for COVID. Again, what I said was anybody would be demonstrably better than Trump. It's not this box of water. would have saved more lives than Donald Trump. So I'm saying if this box of water had been president instead of Donald Trump, fewer people would have died. So it's not a credit to Biden. It's just saying, again, there's something specific about Trump's regime that I think was uniquely bad, maybe unprecedentedly bad in the modern era. But that doesn't negate the fact that Biden and Obama and whomever else are very, very dangerous presidents and very, very dangerous presidencies.
Yeah. And
I think I have a hard time. Yeah, I guess I have a hard time believing that, like, I think the idea of someone like Trump in office fast tracks what we just talked about, where like you have to kind of go full fascism to get to the alternative and to really see change. And like, I have a hard time believing that any administration that displays a genocide with American taxpayers' money on high definition on our phone screens 24/7, ignoring like pleas from their constituents, would ever protect anybody's rights. It's eventually going to come here. And with Trump, it'll be a little bit faster, but even if Harris won, it's eventually going to come here. It's just going to be a little bit slower and a little bit more insidious and harder to recognize, which, coming from a Palestinian that voted for Biden, is what happened to us. We thought that he would protect American rights. We thought that a Democratic administration would be better for Palestine. Very clearly, we were wrong. We've lost over 200,000 of our people. And so I just have a hard time believing that like there's a difference between the two parties.
So let me push you on that specific point with regard to Palestine, because I have been watching, for a year and 5 weeks now, this vicious, ugly, morally indefensible genocide taking place in Gaza, and I'm watching the United States underwrite it, endorse it, fund it, protect it, enable it, and this is all Democrat business, right? This is all Democrat. I also hear Donald Trump saying they need to fit in a debate with Biden, finish the job, right?
Yeah.
In the week that President-elect Trump has been choosing his cabinet, he's chosen Mike Huckabee to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel. He's someone who is endorsing the complete overtaking or complete occupation of or annexation, complete annexation of the West Bank. I mean, he's comparing the West Bank, which he still calls Judea and Samaria, to the United States' relationship to Manhattan. He does not believe in Palestinian rights or liberation. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. I mean, these are choices that demonstrate a commitment to being even more vile, even more violent, even more destructive of Palestinian people, Palestinian land, etc., than Biden was. Even if I were to concede that Gaza would be just as bad under Biden or Trump or Harris or Trump, which I'm not sure of, I would probably say no. But even if I conceded that point, it'd be hard to make the case based on what we've seen under the previous Trump administration that the conditions in the West Bank, the conditions in East Jerusalem, the conditions in the Golan, etc., wouldn't be significantly worse simply because Trump is saying, no, I'm going to take all of it. I'm going to enable them to take all of it. If we see that kind of distinction, I understand the abstract argument, but it seems to me that more Palestinians are going to die.
I mean, it's very likely that he's going to be significantly worse. I think it's something that everybody's prepared for. My family in Palestine immediately after the election, they were all just like, we're bracing ourselves. We're ready for whatever's coming. But I think the biggest problem that, and I won't speak for everybody, specifically, myself, was people trying to gaslight Palestinians into believing or being more fearful of a Trump administration, and almost telling us that what we were experiencing right now isn't as bad as it could be, as if we didn't already know. So it was like none of us were advocating for a Trump administration. None of us wanted him, but also none of us wanted her. And so I think our biggest focus that was getting lost in translation because of people being fear-mongered was, we understand the danger that Trump presents to us, but this is like a very real present danger under this administration right now. You have, and I think a lot of people for some reason still think that they can talk to Democrats. They wanted another Democrat in office because they think that they can negotiate with them. They think that they'll listen to their voters. But they've made it very clear over the last year that that's not something that they're interested in. And so like the use of fear as that boogeyman that you talked about just didn't work on us. It was never going to work on us, because you cannot give us this hypothetical situation and tell us it's going to be worse than watching children have their heads blown off every single day. It's just not something that we can like literally get on board with.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're talking, and you mentioned we're talking about this in abstract terms. I mean, there is a certain military reality on the ground, because they're fighting a three-front campaign, ground action, that Trump and Trump's administration, no matter how much support he gives them, is not going to change the strategic or the operational conduct of the war. So yes, they can ethnically cleanse northern Gaza eventually. However, in order to defeat Hamas, and this is not just me saying it as, you know, someone with a background in military intelligence, it's also, they have their own intelligence veterans speaking to Ynet News, to Haaretz, saying, yeah, we can't defeat Hamas before 2028. And personally, that's conservative. In order to defeat Hamas, because they've created a whole new military acronym, Wounded Child, No Surviving Family, they're not going away. And guess what? They are still able to conduct low intensity insurgency operations. They just conducted a mass cal. 5 Israeli soldiers dead last night in Jabalia refugee camp. In southern Lebanon, 2 nights ago, they X'd out an entire Israeli special operations team. Hezbollah did. The entire state has a gag order on the amount of casualties they're taking. Their economy's in tatters. Part of their massive military information operations push after the hooligan attack in Amsterdam was to create like enough fear to get people to come back to the homeland. They're hemorrhaging settlers, and it's not sustainable. Also, people are like, they're going to bomb Gaza more, and I'm like, how? They have a massive ammunition shortage. There's a reason Beirut hasn't turned into Gaza, because they don't have enough bombs. Also, we're into our own stockpiles where we're trying to do a geostrategic shift to East Asia, arm Taiwan, have enough munitions to deter China. And we're going into our own stockpiles of 2,000-pound bombs and artillery shells and small munitions. And guess what? There's also a global RDX shortage. That's the compound that makes most bombs. And there's a complete global supply chain shortage. So it comes from the war in Ukraine, various conflicts in Africa, and the insane amount of munitions that have been used to level Gaza. So yeah, Trump's going to give settlers a freer hand? Like what? They already had a completely free hand. Biden was going to sanction like 3 of them, 3 individuals out of the entire West Bank, and he didn't do it. So I do think people will be more violent towards Palestinians in Palestine. Yes, but will it completely dramatically shift the battlefield dynamics and everything going on? No, and Trump has platformed himself on being this anti-war candidate while stalking his cabinet full of people that may not even get nominated, with just straight up full-on neocons. Anti-Iran, and Tulsi Gabbard tries to portray herself as an anti-war person, but she still endorses the war on terror that we should have got.
And they all support these drone wars and other mechanisms that allow you to say, as Donald Trump, I'm anti-war. We had no wars during my presidency, but still extraordinary amounts of death, extraordinary amounts of civilian casualties, extraordinary amounts of destruction.
He dropped more ordnance on Afghanistan than Obama, and I didn't think that was possible. So
that's tough. That's high cotton. Yeah, no, that was tough to do, and he managed to clear the bar. But this is my point. That's why if Palestinians in the United States say, we're voting for Donald Trump, or we're voting for Jill Stein, or we're voting for Claudia Ortiz, or we're voting, or Dela Cruz, Claudia Ortiz from City High, voting for Claudia De La Cruz, or voting for whomever, I have no pushback. I think people have a right to make that case. And it's not for me to tell Palestinians who to vote for, particularly at a moment where they're being genocided by the present administration. I have a little bit of, I have considerable anxiety from my perspective, saying, I don't want to make choices. It's not for me to say, well, I'm going to vote for so-and-so, and yeah, more Palestinians might die, but it's worth it in the long run, right? Or conditions might get worse, but it's worth it. I don't think it's for me to say. I think it's for Palestinians to say. But when I take that same logic to domestic issues, and I say, well, look, I think more people are going to be harmed in this moment than the other moment. I think it's going to be harder to struggle for liberation in this moment than that moment. Yeah, I think it's okay for people to make the choice. For me, it's never been an argument of saying the principal choice is third party or the principal choice is not third party. It's to say that I think that there are several moral calculuses you can make to arrive at a principled choice, even if I disagree with the choice. So, ultimately, I voted for Jill Stein. Mm-hmm. But I struggled with it literally until the last moment. Literally, when I was in line, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Mm-hmm. And at the end, I just couldn't. But I don't think the people who made a different choice, like, for example, I'm just using Angela Davis because she made it public what her choice was. Angela Davis said she was voting for Kamala Harris, not endorsing her, but voting for her because she thought it was the best way to advance a radical agenda long term. I can't tell her that was an unprincipled vote. I can't say that was a non-radical vote. I mean, the choice isn't radical, but the tactic might be. Mm-hmm. And so I'm always struggling through those things. I don't know what the answer is. I don't have an answer here. But I do know that the decision-making process produced a lot of tension. It produced tensions right in this global classroom we're in right now in night school. It produced tensions in organizing spaces. Jenan, I know you've experienced some of it. I'm sure, Greg, you have as well. I know, for example, Jenan, when Kamala Harris says, "I'm speaking," to an audience in Michigan, there were some folk who saw that as a Black woman asserting her agency and her voice and reclaiming her time, even to use the Maxine Waters phrase from Congress. And there were others who were like, no, this is showing a cruel kind of indifference and coldness to the voices of people whose families and friends and communities being genocided at this very moment. Mm-hmm. Instead of mocking or dismissing or derailing their activist efforts, instead of trying to blame them for Trump, or whatever her claim was, just say you're going to vote for Trump if that's what you feel like. Mm-hmm. Instead of doing all that, maybe we could hear them. Now, I know it was more complicated. I know she met with them ahead of time. I know there was lots of other moving parts here, but just the optics of it were awful. But I saw that as one of the first moments where I saw Black activists and Palestinian activists who were on the same side for lots of stuff, starting to say, you're not listening to me. You're not listening to me. This is anti-Black. Mm-hmm. This is pro-genocide, et cetera, et cetera. How did you make sense of that moment? What did you experience?
I was definitely experienced I can't believe this woman is speaking to us this way in this moment. Yeah. I have also unfortunately experienced being called anti-Black. A lot of the argument that was used when I would speak out against Kamala was that, if Palestinians were in the United States, we would be considered white. So amplifying Palestinian issues over Black issues in America is inherently anti-Black, which is hard to hear. But I understand the identity politics of it all. I'm like you, where I wasn't very, very plainly, please excuse my language, I wasn't shitting on people who were voting for Kamala because they were doing it out of fear of Trump or because they thought that it was the right thing to do to protect their rights here. My issue, again, was people trying to gaslight Palestinians into believing that a second administration with Harris at the forefront was going to be any different or any better for us, or like it was the less dangerous option for Palestinians. So it was never, coming at people for choosing to vote what they felt was the most principled thing to do for them and their family's safety. I always understood that. To this day, I understand people who chose to vote for Kamala because they thought that it was the right thing to do for here. It also, I think, has to do a little bit with developing detachment of my American identity and this like desire to return home, which is also something that is specific to Palestinians. It is, for as much as we discuss the similarities between our, liberation struggles, there is ultimately a difference. There is a right of return that Palestinians are fighting for. And so, of course, Black community doesn't want to see this country go up in flames. They don't want to see anything being taken away or life becoming more dangerous here. I understand that. For us as Palestinians, whether we're here or back home, it doesn't matter who's in office. Life is dangerous for us. But the ultimate fight for Palestinians is to access that right of return, meaning leaving here and going back to Palestine. And so I think that that's something that gets lost in translation when we talk about, the similarities of our struggles, because liberation is, of course, all connected, but this is home for many people, and nobody wants to destroy their home. Nobody wants to see their rights and their safety being taken away from them in their own home. And I understand that. I will always understand that. I think my biggest thing was like asking for people to understand where Palestinians were coming from, whether or not we wanted that full right to return home, if we wanted to go home full time, or, just accessing that right of return in general. And it was just something that, because of Trump being that boogeyman, it was just in one ear and out the other every time we tried to explain that. And that was something that was really hard to deal with.
How did you resolve that? I mean, how did you negotiate that, particularly with like Black allies?
I don't know that I've
or comrades, maybe.
Sorry.
That's not or allies or comrades.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know. I don't know that I have an answer. I don't know that I did the best job in anybody's eyes. I've always been very honest. I've always spoken from the heart. I've tried to give people a little bit of insight into my personal life, so that they understand that I'm a real human. I'm not an expert in this world. I also didn't ask to become this person that creates genocide content. I think that this is like an insane thing that anybody has to do. I didn't ask for that. But I was just thrown into this position, and I take it very seriously, and I'm trying to do my best. And I know that I've disappointed people along the way, but I try to hear what other people are saying, and I hope that they hear me in return. And I know that right now tensions are still very high. There's still a lot of friction. I know, Greg, I've seen you, talking about how this is very much CIA, FBI work, especially online in the online space.
Yeah.
Oh, the online space is accessible, and I've seen so much stuff, Greg, that might suggest, to me, it does suggest that there are outside forces, whether it's agent provocateurs, there's just so many things happening that looks like, look, they're trying to divide us. Now, there's enough. Go ahead, please.
I mean, there was a reason that they straight up visibly high-vis assassinated Fred Hampton, who was in charge of the Rainbow Coalition. That's been COINTELPRO's thing. And of course, COINTELPRO no longer exists. But no, they monitor, like my account's monitored, Jenan's account's monitored. They definitely keep track of all of this. And that's not a conspiracy theory. I did one contract in special operations. I went to Columbia with the intent of going into the CIA, and I have, peers that did go into 3-letter agencies. I now work for Veterans for Peace from ex-military intelligence officers who contracted with the NSA. This is actually something that's happening. So when the whole like I'm going back to Starbucks thing happened, I'm like, I'm a white dude. I'm not getting involved. And all I did in the comment section was like,
can I pause you for 1 second, just for context for the audience's benefit?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
After the election, there were people who were, particularly, I'm thinking about Black American voters who were like, screw this. Y'all didn't support Kamala. Y'all didn't support us, i.e. Democrats, i.e. Black folk, whatever the us is. Y'all didn't support us, so the solidarity's done. We're going back. We're no longer going to boycott Starbucks. Or, I've seen prominent liberal journalists say things like, let me see how Gaza is in 6 months. Let me know how this works out for y'all in Gaza in 6 months. Almost like celebrating or tap dancing on the graves of people.
Yeah, well, we said they were gonna do that. Like we knew that they were gonna do that, and the reason, and all I did, because like I stay in my lane generally, which is like military and geopolitical analysis. All I did was type in the comment section, CIA doing victory laps right now, and then I bounced, because like that's actually something that it's indisputable. it happens. And it comes down to like class consciousness and, conceptualizing a model of capitalism that, leads to repression. So yes, they didn't get their candidate of choice, and I don't mean black people, like so many white women jumped on board once they got on board. They got to get their pumpkin spice lattes back. But what they don't realize is that the boycott from Starbucks for most people,
it's not even about Palestine. Yeah.
It's not even about Palestine. It's because they're union busters, literally union busters. And they also donated to the Trump campaign. So good job, I guess. Look, I'm a number of things, but I'm also an anti-war combat veteran activist, and I'm kind of unaffiliated. I work with Veterans for Peace and About Face. And what we're trying to do right now is build more coalitions with more radical groups like Black Panther chapters throughout the U.S. because we look at like precedents for when it comes to intersectionality with regards for radical progressive movements. And that was the Vietnam backlash. And my two favorite movements for that were VAW, Veterans Against the War, and the Black Panthers. And, when people are like, it's going to get so much more violent under Trump and it's going to be hard to organize. Yeah. So that's why you can't just be like part of the pro-Palestine movement. There's also like BLM and Stop Cop City, and you're going to have to like be on board with like all of it, man. Like that's kind of what it looks like going forward. This isolation is what they want. And I don't mean like what the man wants. No, literally it's what they want.
It is quite literally what they want.
Yes.
I think you're right about that. And I think that it's important for us then to say, how do we keep each other honest, reject identity politics, not in the sense that the term was originally conceived to mean like what say Barbara Smith would have meant by that and radical feminist movement meant by it, but sort of how it's used now, so that people are concerned with electing the first Black this or the first woman that, even if it completely contradicts our interests, our economic and political interests. How do we hold each other accountable and keep each other honest about not doing that, while also being really sort of clear-headed and fair-minded about the fact that, again, there are populations who are more vulnerable in this moment than they otherwise would be.
Yeah. So just real quick, Jenan, before I just let you go off, I'm sorry. Well, there are three like tenets to social change. There's agitation, education, and organization. So like you have to educate people about that, educate people on like what building alternative power structures away from state looks like radical stuff like community defense, like mutual aid, like rallying around communities that are like more marginalized than yours. Because I think the Palestinian movement has been really great about this, and the Palestinians have been really great about teaching a ton of people across the globe, like, there's no liberation without collective liberation. So we just got to educate people, and it's easier now on social media, but like it's going to get gnarly, and people have to get involved. So,
Jenan, how did that feel? Did you feel dispirited or disappointed at all when you heard people start to say things like, "We're going back to Starbucks," or we don't care what happens in Palestine anymore?
Yes and no. I mean, it was definitely a little bit of a gut punch. And then, you remember that a couple idiots on TikTok don't represent an entire community.
Fair enough.
But I personally did take it as a moment to express some feelings that I have about, how a lot of people view race in this country, and how Arabs in particular have been erased from the racial construct of the United States. It literally just March of this year is the first time that we've ever had our own dedicated box to check off on a census. Not that census means anything and these statistics are all bullshit, but it is something. But yeah, I think going back to your initial question, it's important to remember that like if you're in the fight for liberation, you got to be in it even when you're uncomfortable. You got to be in it even when you don't get your way. When, if if there's a win for a community, or if, you know, a community is struggling and you're also struggling, there is no moment to ever like backtrack your allyship or your support for a community that is struggling for liberation. And it's understanding that no community is exempt from causing harm to anyone. It's always, you know, checking yourself and making sure that you are genuine in the content that you are putting out. If you're, you know, putting content out online, that you are always very intentional with the things that you are posting, and understanding how things can spiral, like that Starbucks issue. It started off as something stupid, but it did pick up at some point, and it did become a problem. And so I chose to address it when I felt that it was becoming a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like giving yourself a reality check. It's always gut checking yourself. It's talking to people in your community that are a part of other communities that you are not a part of, to make sure that you aren't causing further harm. It's being able to admit when you're wrong, and being able to sit and listen to others and their own particular struggles. Fighting for liberation isn't something that should ever be ego driven. I think that's when it becomes dangerous, and that's when it becomes a problem. And recognizing that nobody's struggle is above anybody else's, and that regardless of what happens, you are in it to fight for a better life for everyone. And that's it. There is no like discussion or reconsideration of that.
But before you guys go, I just want to ask you one more thing. I'm thinking about the Green Party. This seemed like an opportunity for the Green Party to grow. Fewer votes for the Green Party this time than in 2016. I'm not sure I expected that. And there's all kinds of arguments people make for that.
Yeah.
And I certainly had my own criticisms of the Green Party. I remain a Green Party member, a proud Green Party member. I voted Green up and down the ticket. Everybody on the ballot, it was Green, I voted for. But I've been deeply and profoundly frustrated with some things inside of the party, some of which I'd say publicly, some of which I wouldn't. But I don't want to make this about the Green Party. I'm thinking about third party voting in general. How do we make that more of a desirable option? What are we missing? What's going wrong with third party politics with these radical alternatives? Why aren't they more attractive to people outside of maybe the obvious answer, which is, at least in the case of the Green Party, Democrats actively fight to undermine them. They push us off of every ballot. They contest us in court. I mean, the party of democracy is at the same time trying to silence democratic voice and democratic options on the ballot. I get that part, but I want to have a more of a self-critical, self-aware, self-reflective moment for third-party politics. What are we getting right? What are we getting wrong? Why aren't we gaining more ground? Greg, I'll start with you.
I don't know. There's a sort of militancy to machine politics that, you know, the Republicans are the best at because they're most openly fash, and then the Democrats are as well. And also they have massive apparatus behind them. They have massive logistical support for lobbyists, for operatives, plugged in with contact networks. And a third party is just not going to have that. They're not going to be plugged into the political machine whose nexus is Washington. And they're always going to be able to mobilize hit pieces like, you know, I have no idea who Jill Stein really was. Was never really concerned about it because Butch Ware was a personal friend, so that was good enough for me. But you know what was interesting? Watching the DNC stoop so low to do just these crazy hit pieces on her, and just you know, because they were terrified of that. So we'll be contending with that as third-party voters. I'm not really sure I can speak to it because I haven't put that much thought to it. I'll just end with this. Over the next 4 years, I'm not really going to be looking to flip into more radical politics, like hardened, lifelong liberal voters. I'm going to be looking for, and I was talking to Butch about this, the disaffected former MAGA voters of all ethnicities, because honestly, they're easier to talk to, and there's a great opening. It's like, hey buddy, do you hate Democrats? Do you like guns? You know what they say: if you go far enough left, you get your guns back. So that's my goal.
I think that actually works. I think that there's a couple of trolls in the comments right now who may have just been swayed by, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I hope
Register third party next time. Jenan, before I give you the last word on this, somebody put this in. They said you changed your mind the last week, but you pushed for Kamala Harris. Again, just to clarify, I did not. I did not push for Kamala Harris. What I've said from July forward or August forward, whatever, is that I was struggling openly with that. That I don't think it's wrong to vote green. I don't think it's wrong to vote third party. I don't think it's wrong to choose outside the Democratic Republican system. I've done it my entire life. I've voted for one Democrat my entire that I can remember. I mean, I'm wrong. Could be two or something, but you know, in 25 years of voting, I've done it, you know, once to my knowledge. So no, that wasn't my argument. My argument was, hey, there are multiple choices here that are all principled. Here's where I'm leaning and why, but I don't think that mine's the only way. I don't think mine is necessarily the best way. It's the way that I reconciled the issues that I thought were most urgent. But if I thought that it was something that I wanted other people to do, for example, I pushed for Jill Stein, so I campaigned for Jill Stein. I endorsed Jill Stein. I said this is the best choice. During the, you know, Cynthia McKinney, I pushed for Cynthia McKinney because I thought it was the best choice at the time. Made a different, you know, and so I made a different choice. I didn't vote for Obama. I voted for Cynthia McKinney, and I pushed for it. It's not what I did this time. This time, I made my case. I openly said I'm struggling with this. But again, I don't think the other choices are wrong. I thought it was wrong to vote for Obama. I thought it was wrong to vote for Hillary Clinton. I thought it was wrong to vote for, I mean, I could go down the list, right? But this time, I thought it was a struggle for me. And I think sometimes I'm always disappointed by how little grace and how little space we provide each other for political disagreement. And to say, hey, I disagree with your choice, rather than to assume that the choice is unprincipled or dishonest, or, you know, or that people are on the take, or that people are agents. I mean, there's so much bad faith we presume in people who haven't demonstrated any evidence of that. That I think it's always fascinating to me. But I also don't want us to rewrite history. You know, I didn't push for Kamala Harris. I explained where I was, and that it was a struggle right to the last minute. Jenan and I said MLH Night School guest roster tonight is fire. Yo, I guess always be fire, but you two are extra dope. Yo, we really do appreciate you coming through. Jenan, what are you thinking of? How are you thinking about this third party question?
I don't know that I have a concrete answer for you. I'm new to the third party world. I'm definitely someone who blamed a lot of Jill Stein voters in 2016.
Well, you took L on that.
And I publicly apologized for that. But yeah, I mean, you know, I want to see more funding for them. Money is unfortunately a lot of power in the political world. I want to see more involvement in, you know, local organizing and local elections. I know that there is a presence, but I think that people need to be educated that this is a real option. I grew up in the American school system, and I was only taught about the two parties. And so my whole voting life until this year, I believed that we only had two actual options. And so it's getting people to recognize that is a real option for us. And they can only use this fear. You know, it's in 2016, I heard, you know, this is not the time. Okay, I understand you want to vote third party, but this is not the time. And then again, when it was Biden against Trump, it was, okay, I understand, but this is really not the time. We have to keep Trump out of office again. Right. Again, this time it was
always not the time.
Trump is back. Okay, it's really not the time. So when is the time? At some point, people have to decide when they want that time to be. Hopefully it'll be the next, you know, election cycle. Now that, you know, the third parties have picked up some steam and some popularity through social media platforms. I think that was a huge shift because they don't have access to mainstream media. And so a lot of people learned about third party options through social media. If we can, you know, keep real people keeping the momentum going for third parties, there might be something different, you know, come next election. But I don't know that I have a real concrete answer because I'm really just a newbie here.
Again, sometimes openly saying, hey, I'm struggling with this, or I don't have clarity on this, or I'm still working through this is a lesson, because I think so many people watch us on platforms and expect us to have concrete answers, and they presume in the lack of a concrete answer or an open struggle is a sign of something other than just, hey, I'm really struggling with it.
Yeah, like
it's like
genuine
yeah,
feeling.
Yeah,
again, I didn't ask to be this person. I was making stupid TikToks in my thobes, posting my kids on the internet. Like I wanted to be like a mom influencer. And then like this all happened and I was just thrown into this world. And like you said, people don't give you grace. And I hope that can change. Like we need to give each other grace and understanding. And like every day is an opportunity to learn and to be better. And yeah, I hope that everybody continues to like crave that education that I felt like people were craving up until about 2 weeks into the election. They got really distracted. Yeah.
I left this comment up because I wanted to respond to it. A vote for a third party is a vote for the right currently. That's just not true. For one, there are Greg, did you want to respond to that?
Oh yeah. But if you haven't been paying attention to what we've been talking about, a vote for the Democrats is also a vote for the right.
Right. I will say there were a lot of campaigns to like vilify Jill in particular.
So interesting.
Yeah, and it was like the same way that everybody was like, I'm voting for Kamala because she's not Trump. It was like you could say anything you wanted about Jill Stein in that moment. She was not Trump and she was not Kamala, and those were two very dangerous, very very harmful people to put my vote towards. And so it like anything that they said about her, like she wasn't the one that was, signing the agreements to send more bombs. And she wasn't the one that had already stripped people of their rights in 2017.
But I will though.
Sorry.
She's like, but I will though.
Right. It was very weird that people could like get on board with the whole Kamala isn't Trump thing and like use that as a way to like pacify their conscience into voting for her. But they couldn't understand that people who were voting for a third party, regardless of whether it was Jill Stein or not, just voting for somebody who wasn't those two options, they couldn't see that anything that you could say about why you were choosing to vote for Kamala, you could say about a third party as like they're not this bad. They're not, they're not currently doing the damage. They haven't done the damage because they've never been in power. So it always just seemed like the less dangerous option.
And my final thing will be, if voting third party is not actually voting, if you can't vote for who you want to because they have no chance of winning, is this a democracy? And if your answer is no, my question to you is, what are you going to do about it?
Right. And I would just hastily add one more piece of this, which is just even if you look at the data, even if when you say the right, you just mean the Republicans. First of all, there are third party Republican parties. There are freedom parties and libertarian parties and other parties that are clearly taking votes from Trump just directly. But on top of that, the polling right before the election showed that at some point, it was like 47% of Jill Stein voters were pulling from Trump. And it was like 42, I think, or 41% were pulling from Harris. In other words, the thing that I think people miss is even though the Green Party is certainly a left-wing party and a radical party, there are people who are voting Green because they otherwise wouldn't be in this broken or wicked system. There are people who are voting Green because they want to dismantle the status quo. Like there are lots of people who vote Green who wouldn't be voting for Hillary Clinton anyway. So Hillary Clinton still wouldn't have been your president. There are a lot of people Green who aren't voting for Kamala Harris anyway. So it doesn't matter. But in this case, just for the record, to add another piece to this, if every single Green Party member in the world or in the country had voted for Kamala Harris, you know who'd be president right now?
Trump.
Same person. Donald J. Trump. So you can't even scapegoat it even mathematically, right? You just can't.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't. Ultimately, this loss is a Democratic loss. They got to hold that L. They got to explain what happened. I'm sorry, but I know y'all got to run, and I appreciate you. If I could just have 30 more seconds from you, and it's only because a super chat came in from Bullet the Bunny, and she had a question for you, Jenan. It said, as a Palestinian American mom, how are you managing at home?
I'll let you know when I figure it out. No, on a like real note, I'm very much appreciative of the fact that I have 2 Palestinian children who are alive, and I am like grateful for it. I don't take it for granted, and they force me to feel joy in really hard moments. So I'm like, just from the mom perspective, I know how lucky I am in particular to have children, especially at that age. I believe the statistic is that the average Palestinian doesn't make it past age 5, average Palestinian child, and mine is 5.5. So that's a big thing for a Palestinian kid. So yeah, I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. And with the remaining 20 seconds that I have, 10 seconds apiece, it's only because these are super chats and people donated to ask these questions. What do Greg and Jenan think the most powerful actions we can take are in the next few months?
Educate yourself with try and educate people and do outreach within your own personal sphere. Grassroots education is going to be a big thing. We need to start talking more about like what mutual aid and community defense and building alternative power structures away from the state is. We're going to be doing that before Trump gets elected. So stay tuned.
I love it. And Jenan, you get the last word.
Yeah, I'm on that page. You have to continue to educate yourself, educate your circle, build your community in person, make sure that you have a space offline to find comfort in and to work with. Like Greg said, community aid and mutual aid is going to be the thing that saves us and keeps us all together and healthy and safe. So
I love it. I love it. Greg Stoker, Jenan Matari, thank you so much both for joining me tonight. It was a pleasure. We'll talk soon.
Thanks you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, family. Before you go, 2 quick stories I want to run by you all. But weren't they dope? Weren't they amazing? Weren't they amazing? They are the absolute best, yo. I'm so grateful for their time, their generosity, their insight. We're going to get free, and we're going to get free because of people like Jenan and Greg. I really mean that. Before we go, just a couple quick stories. We have to absolutely, positively talk about Donald Trump one more again. Donald Trump continues to, let's just say, outdo himself with each cabinet nomination that he makes. The president-elect has tapped RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the man with a brain worm who has been denounced by his entire family to be a part of his cabinet. You know, there are a few choices that I think could be as telling as this one. I can't even call it surprising and I can't call it the worst choice. Not because it's not bad, but because, again, Huckabee and Rubio and Matt Gaetz, for God's sake. But anyway, RFK Jr. has long been an anti-vaxxer. He is also a huge conspiracy theorist with a history of promoting baseless claims surrounding science, health, and medicine. To be clear, I'm not against a good conspiracy, and I don't think conspiracy theory in a country like this is inherently problematic. In fact, it's probably inherently good because this country is built on lies and secrets. So I have no issue with any of that. But this is the kind of stuff he's talking about. He says that Wi-Fi causes cancer and a leaky brain. Wi-Fi. He says chemicals in our water can lead children to become transgender. He says, though, people are becoming trans because it's in the water. School shootings are attributable, he says, not to having too many guns. Nope. That'd be too easy. He says school shootings are attributable to antidepressants. He says the COVID vaccine was genetically engineered to spare the Jews. That is, again, I don't even understand what it means, but it feels anti-Semitic. And it's certainly wrong, right? And of course, he says vaccines in general cause autism and don't protect people from disease. So he's anti-vax as well. So to be clear, in case you're wondering why this is so frustrating, people have a right to believe crazy shit, right? People have a right to believe what they want to believe. But here's the problem. RFK Jr. becomes the next HHS secretary. He's not just a guy with an opinion. He's the guy that oversees the Food and Drug Administration. He's the person that oversees the Centers for Disease Control. He's the one who oversees the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, the Administration for Children and Family, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So if you don't believe in science, or you don't trust science, or you have crazy conspiracy theories, if you have medical beliefs that are contradicted by science, and he ain't even a doctor. If you live in that kind of space, it becomes very, very dangerous to be RFK Jr. as HHS secretary. It means that our concrete realities can be different. The drugs we can access are different. The way illness gets treated could be different. I mean, these are the things, the way veterans benefits get treated, the way issues of health and harm are investigated, how we deal with a pandemic, all of it could be severely undermined by the presence of RFK, who's wildly unqualified for this job, for him to be in power. And it makes you just wonder, what the hell? What the hell does Donald Trump use as a criterion for selecting people other than he did me a favor, or he didn't harm me, or he dropped out of the race, or he, he donated, whatever the choice. I don't know what the reasons are, but I do know they ain't good ones, given who he has, given who Donald Trump, given who he's chosen. I want to pull up one more thing, and it's just a reminder, because I think these reminders are incredibly important for a variety of reasons. I'm going to pull this up, and I want you all to pay careful attention to it. Today, the U.S. State Department rejected a report from the United Nations that found that Israel's war methods in Gaza are consistent with genocide. The Biden administration also dismissed findings from Human Rights Watch, which accuses Israel of crimes against humanity and forced displacement. Take a look at this.
To ask you about the latest after our exchanges on, I guess it was Tuesday, about the aid situation and this new UN Commission report that is very harshly critical of Israel. One, since Tuesday, have you seen anything that would make you think that they are now more in compliance with the criteria that were laid out in the letter? And number two, what do you think of this UN Commission's?
Let me get to the second part of your question first. As it relates to the UN Commission, I've seen some of that reporting, and we've seen some language coming out of that indicative of their belief that some of the actions could be constituted as, this is their phrasing, genocide. That is something we would unequivocally disagree with. Again, we think that that kind of phrasing and those kinds of accusations are certainly unfounded. As it relates to the humanitarian,
certainly unfounded. So again, the United States continues to be in extraordinary denial. The State Department, it's an interesting place. We've had people step down from the State Department recently, and I interviewed one of those people this Friday. You'll see it tomorrow. You'll see it on Al Jazeera, who walked out of the State Department because of the hypocrisy, because of the contradictions, because of the unethical behavior of the Biden administration with regard to Israel-Palestine that defies international law, convention, human rights, and just good old-fashioned decency. But all that aside, the United States is going to continue to do what it does, and that is defend Israel. First, it was, hey, if you show us evidence that they're violating the rules, we'll do something about it. Then the United States gives them the evidence, and the United States State Department says, U.S. State Department says, we reject the research. We reject the investigation. We don't believe that this is true. The Biden administration dismissed findings from Human Rights Watch, as well as the UN, that said that Israel is engaged in forced displacement. So once again, they say, look, if you start displacing people, we'll stop it. But we don't see any displacement. They gave 30 days to stop blocking humanitarian aid being distributed. 30 days goes, they say, oh, we'll give you another 30 days. They're giving the extension to the aid blocker, not the recipient of the aid, the desired recipient of the aid. The point here is, quite simply, the United States is never, at this juncture in history, going to apply any political pressure, any economic pressure, any sanctions to Israel. The United States is going to continue to enable Israel and to remain willfully ignorant of its actions in the Gaza Strip and throughout historic Palestine. So we have to apply pressure. We have to apply pressure as voters. We have to apply pressure as organizers and activists. That does not stop on November 5th. That does not stop on election day. It continues 24/7, 365. Every day of every year, of every month, of every whatever, we have to be diligent about applying the pressure, because if we don't and no one's looking, it only gets worse. But the fact that the State Department is doing this at the same time that Donald Trump is electing, or appointing rather, people like Huckabee and Gates and all of them, Huckabee, Gates, Rubio, etc. Stefanik, it suggests, or it reminds us, that liberation ain't coming from either side of the political aisle. It's not coming from either side. We got to find our own. We got to seek our own. We got to make our own. Anyway, family, thank you for watching Night School tonight. It is an absolute pleasure to have you hang out with me, and more importantly, for me to be gifted the opportunity to hang out with you. If you like what you saw, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button as well. And if you're so inclined, hit the join button, become a monthly member of the channel, which gives us the financial stability and support we need to build what we have here, which is the Global Classroom. But if you can't make a monthly commitment, go to Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle right now. Make a one-time donation to the channel, a one-time commitment to investing in our economic strength. You can drop $1 in, we're grateful. You can drop $1 million in, we'll be a little more grateful. But everything in the middle, it's equally welcome. Ideally, if everybody watching right now, if everybody who is paying attention to Night School right now could drop just $10 minimum. If everybody watching would drop $10 for the month, it would allow us to meet our financial goals. It would allow us to pay bills, to pay for technology, to pay my staff, to build toward a new studio, to do all of the things we do with Night School Monday to Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern, office hours 9 p.m. on Sunday, Coffee and Books on 9 a.m. Saturday, and the Classroom in the Cell 9 a.m. Sunday. All of it is produced through your support. There are no corporate dollars backing us. There are no billionaires giving us support. This is purely grassroots, from the people, by the people, and for the people. So just know that, and thank you. Thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for watching Night School. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.